The Minerals of the Energy Transition with Craig Hutton, mining economist. Let me share something very interesting from him. His disclaimer in LinkedIn is very interesting. I like it. Open quotes. Comments and opinions are my own. Closing quotes. Very interesting one, Craig. Good morning, Craig. Thank you for coming. It's a pleasure.
Morning, Armando. Pleasure to be with you on this podcast.
Perfect. Craig sent me a file with pictures, figures. So please just ask me for me, and I can project for him. No problems. Craig, please. Wind farms, solar panels for energy capture, batteries for energy storage. What minerals are needed to support the energy transition challenge?
Armando, I mean, what's interesting is they're typically referred to as the battery metals, but, in truth, they should rather be called transition metals. Batteries that are required, are dependent on some specific chemistries. And typically those battery metals would be, lithium, cobalt, manganese, graphene, amongst others. But really, we're talking about the energy transition. So that's a broader basket of metals, and typically they will include the coppers, the nickels, and the broader basket of metals. As I say, I think what is important is that certainly in my world is the one battery metal, if you wish, transition metal that is critical and key is copper. I was reading the article the other day, and it says, copper is at the heart of the transition energy move, towards clean energy.
Mhm. And where are located the main source of this material? And do we have enough source to challenge the energy transition they're telling?
So I wonder what's interesting. I mean, these are two big questions, and I'll talk to them separately, and two important questions. The thing about the energy transition is, where we go and source these different metals are located in clustered in specific locations. For instance, lithium, the lithium triangle is Bolivia, Argentina, and Chile. And obviously now Australia is coming forward, put their hands up as well. So there certainly are specific locations. The other one, typical battery metal, as I said, is cobalt. 70% of the cobalt is produced from the Democratic Republic of Congo. And then, of course, not only are these metals located in specific areas, layer over those the sort of geopolitics that goes on, and also the national politics. So it's certainly in terms of supply, it's far from the North American markets, but there's also significant issues around being able to tap into those supplies. Yep.
No. The point I will add something like I heard. I'm not sure that the United States announced that they have a very huge amount of lithium resource, and why they do not explore themselves in their territories.
Yeah, look, I think the whole push on the ESG front, is complicating matters, and I think, look, any reasonable person is fundamentally not opposed to better environment, social responsibility, and good governance. And I think certainly, in the broad principles that are laid out, certainly, I support good governance, I support, cleaner environment. But I think what has happened is, there's a layer of politicization and, I think agendas that are playing out and really utilizing the ESG banner, frankly, for other purposes. So, as a consequence, what we're seeing in the States is, there's a recognition for the need for these metals. clearly there's a recognition and a desire to move to clean energy. But between success of the energy transition is being able to understand that you're going to have to dig a lot more minerals out of the ground to displace fossil fuel. And so in the States, you have a very militant and aggressive environmental movement. And really they're just shutting down the ability of the United States to actually access and tap vital minerals. And indeed, as you said, a significant find in the States, very, very large. It's in a volcanic caldera. But we'll have to wait and see whether the EPA is going to give them permission to advance that. For now, it seems they well intended to develop a large mine, but time will tell whether they'll be able to advance that mine.
Perfect. Sorry, I did not give you enough time to the second question. So, do you have enough in the world of these minerals to reach the net zero goal? How do you see the volumes that we need and the volume that we just have?
I sent you this presentation that you can share with your audience.
Sure.
So that would be
which slide?
Number 7.
7.
Yeah, it's number 7.
Perfect.
There we go. And I found this on the internet, and it was quite interesting. Do we have enough minerals? Well, according to this particular author from the BGR and USGS, they tabulated some of the critical minerals: copper, nickel, lithium, cobalt, graphite, in both its forms, silicon and vanadium. And the point they're making is that what is demanded versus what we can produce, there's a significant shortfall. And in order to actually go and not only define and develop those, it's also out there that we need between 300 and 400 mines that need to be developed. So, in terms of copper, I think it's well documented that clearly there's more than enough copper in resource rather than in reserves in the world. Certainly there's enough lithium in the ground, but that's not where the bottleneck is, Armando. The bottleneck sits in being able to, first of all, do all the hard yards to go and define those resources and then take them through all the stage gates that are necessary. And bearing in mind, those stage gates are not only technical, but now, the strong ESG component is in there. And then also bear in mind that, again, it's well documented and well known. It takes anything from 5 years, and that's if you already have a reserve, you don't done all the test work, to develop it, up to 20 years. I mean, Kamoa in the DRC by Robert Friedland, took well over 20 years to bring into production. And I think, Armando, this is the disconnect where, you have market participants who go, we got enough lithium and we've got enough copper. But what's missing in their calculations and their calculus is that time lag. And, supply from mining is very inelastic. So you can't just switch it on and switch it off, just because of the nature of mining. So it takes a long time to get there. And when you get there, again, you can't just switch it off. It's going to keep coming.
Perfect. Let me. I have. Okay, we have source. We have a different place in the world that have more or less, and but after the mining process, we have to process these minerals to have metals, usable metals to equipment, to systems, to construct batteries, etc. Where this material are processed? Is it only in China? We have different places that we can process these minerals.
Again, this is the good question. As I said earlier, it's one thing to consider that you have vast amounts of these minerals in the ground locked up. Then you have to build the mines, and then, as you say, you have to process this mine. Now, as you know, Brazil has a major smelter and refining capacity. But the bulk of all the refining capacity sits in China. And the challenge that in the Western world we have is, there's been this onslaught to meet very, very vigorous Paris Climate Agreement deadlines. We're seeing the UK is now relaxing some of those because the reality is, whereas China has looked at the timelines and said, look, they are engaged. They understand that going away from fossil fuels is ultimately a good thing for the planet. But they've rationally looked at what's reasonable and feasible. And remember, they've got 90% of the smelting capability in the world. So if they were just to shut down, fossil fuels, all of that refining capability would disappear overnight. So that's the big bottleneck. China certainly has played their cards really well. They understood that downstream of mining, you have to do the processing, the smelting and the refining. And so they built that capacity, whereas the West, the Bolivins and others are in big trouble because of the energy crisis that is playing out in the Western world. So, the cluster is actually quite easy to identify. To your question, most of that refining and smelting capacity sits in China.
Western countries are trying to move back some factories, some manufacturing plants to their territories. Do you see as feasible this thing or very difficult?
Yeah, it depends, Amanda, how you define difficulty. And again, I think the technologies were all developed in the West. So we know how to do this stuff, and we have done it for many generations. But the problem is we outsourced, all of our capabilities. From the 90s, it was very trendy. Wall Street said, outsource everything. We have China, who's going to be the big factory. And then what's happened is the geopolitics has taken place. So now what we do is we dress up the move away from China as supply chain diversification.
Perfect. And the first and second tiers, the providers tiers.
Yeah, but now how long is that going to take? So we have this onslaught to move aggressively towards these timelines. But we also have the geopolitics playing out, and we're saying we need supply chain diversification. But now you have to go and build that capability. And of course, again, what I don't think, I think in circles it's appreciated, but it's probably not, loudly spoken, is that, the West is carrying significant amounts of debt. In the mining space, the junior space that I operate in, there's a dearth of liquidity around. And so you scratch your head and you go, well, you've got these timelines, you've got this push by regulators and policymakers, to go green, but you say, well, where's the money? Where's the secondary tiers of supply chain management? And so I think the world, certainly the Western world at the moment, is in somewhat of a quandary, and perhaps doesn't want to admit the realities of what is transpiring. And that is, I don't believe, when you look at the numbers, that we have, without China, we don't have sufficient secondary diversification in the supply chain.
Perfect. Let's talk about a sensible topic, but of course we need to talk about truths in this point, the environmental and social issues. From the beginning to the end of the process, we cannot see only a part of the process and make conclusions, have conclusions about that. We need to see the end-to-end processes. What I mean, child and slave or labor in mining, do you see this in developed countries or less developed countries? I mean,
yeah. Look, I think one of the sort of banner child of child labor is playing out in the DRC, and certainly none of us, certainly in developed countries, want to see our children working as essentially slave labor. But the reality is, when you look at these third world countries, when you have a look that their economies haven't been developed, and I think the politics around that is again a different you know a different discourse. But the reality is, when you've got hungry people,
Yeah.
what do they do? And we can pontificate, from Paris and Geneva and London and in New York that this is a bad and it's a scourge, and no argument on that front. But they're hungry mouths to be fed. I've done a lot of work in Zimbabwe. If you have a look at the state of mining in Zimbabwe, it's dreadful. If you go to Mozambique, again, it's dreadful. But those are the realities, and how do we overcome that? Well, I think people like Trafigura who really are attempting to sort of bring artisanal mining into the fold on a more structural basis are good steps forward. So I think initiatives such as the Trafiguras of the world, what they're doing, are vital, important. But I don't think it's a problem that is going to be solved overnight. And I also think Armando probably would likely get worse, because as the price of metal goes up, it becomes more and more attractive for artisanals to flood into the known areas where the minerals. So look, no easy answers to that. I think we're going to have to reconcile with the reality of the fact that we're going to have to live with it. But that shouldn't stop us as an industry in doing all we can to, formalize the artisanal world such that, we at least make a big dent in diminishing, child labor.
Yeah. What are the problems we can have with mining? I mean, water consumption. What are the environmental problems we can have with mining of these materials?
So look, I think they are certainly many. The reality is when you go mining, you're certainly going to have an impact on the environment. And before I sort of list off issues, I think the one industry that I'm certainly very, very proud of is the mining industry. I've been in the industry for 35 years. From when I started to where we are today, across a wide vista of key issues. Safety has radically improved, and the environmental. Miners take it really, really seriously. Notwithstanding that there are from time to time going to be events that things happen, and when climatic conditions are unfavourable, that's where you get slime dam disasters. We saw that in Brazil with BHP Billiton, and I think it was Rio. So those are the big banner headlines. Tailings is bad, and the reality is that if those aren't carefully managed, you will get disasters like that. But I have to tell you that I think the industry has paid huge amounts of attention to those matters. In terms of getting your licenses, there are very vigorous hurdles that you have to pass through that are enforced by the regulators around the world. And again, I don't think there's sufficient recognition given to the mining industry when because I think it's from ignorance that people speak, and rather than the reality of how do you get that license? How do you get the mining license? What are the steps that you have to go through? So environmental is right up there, and miners to get that license have to do a huge amount of compliance to get it, and then there's monitoring that continues on post the license and through the life cycle of a mine. So I think, on balance, Armando, whilst, the environment is going to be displaced, I think the mining industry exhibits a huge amount of responsibility and goodwill. And then not only do they, focus on the environment, but, when it comes to mine closure, there are funds now that are dedicated to restoring the environment so that, the footprint is minimized. So yeah, I mean, we just have to accept that we do affect the environment. The question is, has there been sufficient emphasis been placed in the mining industry to make sure that it's minimized? And my view is absolutely, the mining industry takes environment very, very seriously.
Perfect. And about the disposal of the used materials after use blades and batteries. are the things, let's see, addressed, well addressed in the world?
Armando, I mean, this is a big concern, and I think I certainly probably don't have all the answer to it, save, what I read as you would read in the press, photovoltaics, the first generation of photovoltaics now coming to the end of the useful life. And what's happening at the moment, the blades, the photovoltaic panels, even lithium batteries, which are highly toxic. There's talk about, recycling, etc. And, I think that's fundamental. But let's look at a blade, for instance. What can you recycle from a wind blade? It's carbon fiber and, other metals that really, to my knowledge, aren't readily recyclable. Can you repurpose them? I think perhaps in time technology either is going to be looking at materials that are recyclable, or we're going to have to just dispose of them. And what's happening today, Armando, is they're digging big holes in the ground and they're just burying this stuff. So from the energy transition side, and I really do hope that miners now are not blamed for this. Miners are responding to a need for the transition metals. It's the end user, it's you and I sitting at home, and it's the providers who now have to address those challenges.
That's right.
And we really need to start paying attention to it, because I think, particularly things like lithium batteries, which have a high toxicity, we need a solution to quite quickly.
Oh yeah, that's the most important point. Yeah, sure. But Craig, let me ask you about the money needed to make this huge transformation in terms of energy. Where these funds come from, and is too much subsidies or government money, private money? How is the equation of money in this additional needs to the energy transition?
So BHP came out recently with a number of about 70 billion per annum.
Wow.
That's a big number. And frankly, the big miners don't have the balance sheets. I mean, in the context of we need to build between 300 and 400 mines. Those mines, depending on where they are, depending on the grade of the resource, depending on the scale of the resource, what we are seeing is that the grades of mines are falling rapidly. For example, copper a decade ago was at about 1.2% copper head grade for the world. It's now sitting at 0.5%. So the grades are falling. If the grades fall, it means you have to move more rock. More rock means bigger plants, bigger equipment, etc. And that therefore means more money. So where is this money coming from? Well, we're starting to see the green shoots, such as Saudi Arabia, stepping up, and they've got a sovereign wealth fund, and so they're starting to move into that space. But my view, and of course, we also see that the United States now, with their new legislation for critical minerals, are offering grants and funding and tax breaks. But I think, Armando, not enough. And not at the pace that we're going to need it. I see typically African countries tend to sit back and wait for the investment. African countries do very little in terms of actually local governments actually stepping up and saying, we're going to make some funds available, we're going to support small miners. I think that has to change in Africa, probably has to change in South America and even to that extent in Australia, because I don't think in and of themselves the capital markets are going to have the abilities to fund $70 billion per annum. I'm happy to be re-educated on that point, but right now I don't see it. Without government, we won't get there.
But some of this money is subsidies, is considered government money to support the process, or it's not private.
Yeah, I mean, it's for now, what I'm seeing in the market is, again, there's green shoots, and governments are recognizing that there's this need to promote. But what I'm seeing is sort of outside of Saudi, I'm seeing sort of a lot of passive support from governments,
Yeah,
i.e.,
that's
subsidies
the
and
point.
tax breaks, etc. So you still got to initiate those projects, and that's where a huge bottleneck exists at the moment. And capital markets are not designed for what miners need. What people don't understand about mining investment is, one, it's a very patient investor. So you'll put your money in, and this is assuming that you have a reserve that's already been signed off, and it probably takes you 3 to 5 years before you get your payback. But in those 3 to 5 years, you face enormous amount of risk, and the list is very, very long. And so, capital markets, when you look at these private equities, their briefs are for 3 years. So, that money comes in, they want to exact the highest return, they want 10 times return on the investment, which becomes really difficult. You can get it, but, with falling grades, with, time delays that are caused because, permitting comes in late, and, environmental issues, you could stumble and, you get 6 months delay. Capital markets, private equity, are not geared for this type of investment by themselves. So, the short is, without governments being less passive and actually, getting in and writing big checks to support the miners, I think the transition is going to be retarded, because sufficient money, the 70 billion that they talk about, I certainly can't see, right now. And I'm keenly watching to see where those sources of financing are going to come from.
Yeah. I have two more points. If you have something that I not covered, please feel free to bring to us. Okay, your pictures and so. But one point that I would like to ask you is the barriers, the challenge that the energy addition or transition, I'm not sure about that, research. What are the main restrictions we have today for these investments and this mining increasing? And what are the main barriers you have?
So I guess talking from a small cap perspective, what you have in the mining industry, certainly from my perspective, is you have the big major players. Their roles in society is to make sure that they go and accumulate a whole bunch of assets, put it together, and make sure that there's a consistent supply of material. But the big players typically don't have as good a track record of exploration success as the juniors. If you go to North America, there's over 7,000 juniors in that space. And the junior space, Armando, is made up of a very peculiar breed of person. These people are high risk, they're salty people. They want to get out there, they want to discover new resources, and it's a hard game, and it's very, very high risk. But they also have to have a high level of skill. They have to know what they're doing. Typically, this entrepreneurial, high skill, high energy, high risk appetite, these types of people don't sit well within these big corporates, because they tend to be very challenging personalities, and they never take no for an answer. And so what they do is they go into the space of exploration and mine development. But the problem is, the market again is divided into two segments. The one segment is the institutional investors, and typically are investing because they want regular dividends. In the past, miners didn't pay regular dividends, but that's been addressed. But as some CEOs have said, is that there's been insufficient reinvestment in the exploration from the majors in the last decade, and that's why we have a reserve crisis. But in the junior space, where we are finding a lot of activity, I mean, as you mentioned, the lithium fund in the USA, those were juniors who did that, not the big players. And now the question is, the type of investor who invests in them are the mom and pops. And really what they're looking for is, good news flow, the share price goes up, and they make, a lot of money, and then, they go off. But, and those juniors have to keep coming back to the market, asking for $1 million here, $2 million here. And then when markets, as we're seeing at the moment, start to come under pressure, it's the juniors who suffer very quickly and most severely, which again, then, you have this circular impact. It impacts the pipeline, and it impacts ultimately the ability of the seniors to do mergers and acquisitions. So, I think, a long answer to your question, in terms of investment, we really need to start focusing, the world needs to start focusing on these juniors, these highly skilled, ambitious people in these juniors, and really support them. And again, I think, this is where governments have to step up and help the junior space.
Great. If you could make a ranking of minerals, focus on the shortage potential, risk of shortage. What's the ranking? What's the three main minerals that could have a shortage in the near future?
So again, Armando, it's rare earths could fall into that category with their shortages. And a point that I try and make to people is, so if you talk about copper, lithium, etc., there's not a shortage of those materials per se on the ground. The shortage comes in is the gap from going from the ground ultimately to making the product. That's where the constraints are. So again, if I come back to that slide, that I referred you to, basically the author was saying copper, nickel, lithium, cobalt, graphite, graphene, silicon, vanadium. And then when you have a look at the, total metal required to produce one generation of technology, and you compare that to what we are producing, and then you then compare years to produce those metals, and so in the right-hand column is 2019. You start to look at those numbers and in the context of what is short. And again, all I can say, Armando, is I think the minerals are pretty much there, and our exploration technologies are there. We have phenomenal exploration technologies. The shortage is not minerals. The shortage is getting the minerals to the end user through this very, arduous process, of, funding all the steps that are in place, and then obviously meeting all the ESG requirements. That is what's creating the shortage of minerals, in my opinion.
Perfect. I have a last question, a very easy question for you, the last one. Do you believe that the energy transition will reach 2050 net zero goal?
It's challenging. And, I think I take my leaf and my lead from the east rather than from the west. I think that in the west there's a huge amount of ideology driving net zero. And the problem is when you want to sit down and have a reasonable argument, it becomes, it's like you're either for us or you're against us. Whereas in the east, China is saying, 2060, 2070, 2080, those are the numbers. And that's not stopping China, building photovoltaics, doing hydroelectric. But, China and India are, and in fact, Indonesia are building fossil fuels. BHP Billiton has just come back from India. Coal. BHP Billiton has just come back from India. The CEO has. And he was, saying that the coking coal business is going to do really well because obviously with India rising. So I think in all fairness, we have to separate the ideology and religion of the
Yeah,
energy
yeah, you're
transition
right. You're right.
from the realities. Now, there will be howls of you're anti change and all the rest of it. And if looking at the challenges is anti-change, well, sadly, labeling someone, is not going to actually address the issues, and the issues are physical constraints.
Yeah, that's right.
So to your answer, do I think that we will make the 2030s? Will we make the 2050s? I
Yeah,
think the regulators politically are committed to it. I think we're on track, which means that metal prices have to rise. We see copper coming off. My view has always been there has been an incentive price. The average margin for copper, for instance, historically, is the cash cost plus 40%. So if the average cash cost at the 90th percentile is $6,000, you're looking at $8,500, for copper. Now, for the better part of this year, we've seen 8,500 or thereabouts. And then when we see it softening, all that does is it just makes it more difficult to meet the 2030, the 2050 deadlines. So
yeah,
there's this vicious play going on between sort of ideology, market movements, short-termism, and then the reality of actually being able to do that transition.
yeah.
But humanity we've come a long way as human beings, and somehow through all the chaos, somehow we managed to advance. So it's a time of upheaval. It's a time where I think everyone's grappling with issues. People are going to fight and people are going to name call and all the rest of it. But I think that's part of the human condition. And I think we're on track for energy transition. There's no doubt that. I mean, I don't think there's reversal. But I do think the timelines, frankly, are aggressive, and I think there's coming a time when everyone's going to, unfortunately, do less name calling and say, okay, how do we get the job done?
The last question, please. I cannot
Sure.
go without that. Imagine that Craig Hutton has half money that Larry Fink has. Which mineral mining Craig will invest?
Yeah, I mean, my three would be copper. I mean, copper is at the heart of the transition. It's transmission, distribution, generation. Everything in your home is about copper. We don't have enough copper, so copper is right up there. I think lithium. The problem with lithium is, as prices move around, is there potential for substitution, and there certainly is. But there's different battery technologies. But right now, lithium is right up there. And of course, the other one that I think that we're going to have to reconcile with, and that's uranium. And, uranium prices are up. I think in the energy mix, whether people like it or not, uranium is going to play a fundamental role. Nuclear is going to have to come online. So those really would be my three picks on Monday.
Great. Brazil is fifth reserves in the world of uranium. It's a very big reserve.
Well, we operate in Namibia as well, and they're well known for uranium. So I think Namibia and Brazil and other countries that are producing uranium are going to do well. And in fact, South Africa, for instance, as a byproduct of all the gold mining, used to produce a huge amount of uranium. So I think and Namibia is doing really well as a country. They found significant oil and gas reserves. They've got well-established uranium mines, and I think Brazil is certainly going to be a big player in that energy space.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the minerals of the energy transition. Was a great pleasure, Craig Hutton, mining economist, talking to you this morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amanda. Nice being interviewed by you, and happy to engage with you in the future.
To share this knowledge that you have. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Well, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.